Hi again then guys, and welcome to another look back into the past of the Ride franchise, to the first game yet again, to take a look at a specific bike, and this is from a manufacturer that I always speak about with a lot of love, and that is MV Agusta. Of course, an Italian brand. As far as I'm concerned, they are essentially the Pagani of the bike world. They have these exquisitely detailed, kind of outlandishly designed, but at the same time very pretty, kind of gothic designs, again very much like Pagani. They managed to make very sharp shapes work in an overall flow in both the case of Pagani and MV Agusta, and usually they have not necessarily huge engine bikes, but they tend to offer a lot in the 1 litre region. That tends to be where most of their most popular ones, their most respected ones, their fastest ones certainly tend to be. The F4 1000R, of course the R312, which is extremely fast. This one though is a decided step back from that world of extreme high power and high performance to something much more, you could say, track oriented, but in more of kind of a weekend toy sort of way, more of a Yamaha R6 kind of approach, or a Kawasaki ZX6R, very literally so. Now, I straight up love this bike. It's one of my favourite MV Agustas in the game, and I've spoken to the fact before that I love bikes that have smaller engines. Not tiny ones like 400 or 500s, but not that that's tiny, it's an average engine size, but I really like bikes with around a 600 to 700cc capacity because they have such great manners. You get a decent amount of straight line power, more than enough for most people on the road at least, maybe not on a track day, but that's another scenario. But at the same time, they're typically a little bit more compact, and more importantly quite a bit lighter than say a 1 litre or a 1200cc bike. And this is a perfect example of that, because although MV Agustas, generally speaking, certainly are not what you call a lightweight bike, this one is not particularly heavy. It weighs a little bit more than, for instance, a roughly 2006 kind of shape Yamaha R1, which of course is a much bigger engine, a much more full-on superbike approach, whereas this one has nowhere near that kind of power. However, it does have a similar amount of weight. This one weighs 173 kilos, which is a good 10 to 20 kilos less than say a 750 or a 1000, which doesn't sound like a huge difference, but of course in bike terms 10 to 20 kilos is a huge difference. That's like 200 or 300 kilos different for a car, and that can make a world of difference really between something like a sedan and a sports car. So in terms of power, that 675 engine puts out 128 horses and a modest, but not too surprising, 52 pound-feet of torque. So it's not going to break the bank in terms of spec, but at the same time, as I mentioned earlier, it's kind of not supposed to, because just like the F3 800, which looks relatively similar, it's a different approach to performance. It's the kind of thing that's more focused on zippy low-end acceleration and really great cornering ability. Coupled with the lower weight, you can stop the bike quicker, the brakes feel great. It's the kind of super bike that you can throw through corners rather than flying down straights, because something like an F4 1000R, for instance, or even the 800 version, you get so much speed on the straights, and then you've just got to scrub it all off by the time you get to a corner, and sometimes those big powerful engines can result in the bike itself becoming bigger and heavier. More often than not it will, unless it's something like a super specialised bike like a track day toy or some kind of experimental machine, you could say. And the result of that is they tend to be more cumbersome through corners. That's just the way it is for most bikes. However, with a bike like this, you can keep up your average speed so high that it can more than make up on a technical circuit any kind of lack in power that it might initially seem to have, because this thing can easily keep up with bikes that have 20 or 30 horsepower more, especially if you go a little bit older. And of course that advantage is fairly obvious because bike tech advances so quickly. Now, in terms of pricing, MV Agustas in the real world, and generally in games as well, are pretty expensive bikes. In the real world they are among the most expensive Italian bikes. One of them will set you back about, say, 14 to 16 grand for something like an F4 1000. And although that doesn't sound like a huge amount to, for instance, a car enthusiast, for a bike, that's a huge amount. That's roughly double the price that you can get a similar kind of performance Japanese bike for, if not more. So, of course, they are exotic, as I said, the Pagani of bikes and all that that implies, so it's not that they're not worth the price. it's just a fact. They're very expensive. They're far more expensive than, for instance, an Aprilia. They're more expensive than most Ducatis, even most Bimotas. And if they're more expensive than Bimotas, sometimes at least, that's kind of saying a lot. Now, in terms of its all-round ability, for 16,000 credits, which is what this one costs, I'd actually say it's a really good deal, because for those lower CC, for instance, online events, or endurance races, or just technical circuit-based stuff in general, rather than tracks with huge, wide, long straights, somewhere where you need to keep your average speed up through tight corners, a lot of start-stop driving, it's perfect for that kind of thing. Because just like the Triumph 675 that we looked at a couple of episodes back, it's that kind of bike, because it's so quick through the corners. Now, one of the reasons why I like this one so much is because typically a, say, 600 to 700cc bike would not usually, at least, be as exotic as this one. And some people would probably disagree with that, but if you think of most of those kind of bikes, they tend to be very dominantly Japanese. Gixxer 600s, Kawasaki 600s, Yamahas, they're very good at that kind of level. If you compare that, for instance, to, say, a 600 Ducati, well, they don't really have as strong an offering at that level, especially when you go slightly older, say the mid-2000s or even earlier, whereas this one is a genuinely great rival to some of those Japanese ones. Plus you get the Italian style, the different kind of sound that the bike makes, the more exotic build quality, in terms of real life especially though, and I just like that. It just has a more exotic vibe to it, and that's exactly what MV Agusta is all about, just like Bimota as well. So overall, if you haven't tried the 675, it's very easy with MV Agusta in this game to get lost in the fray, because they all have a very similar design style, and you could just have a tendency to think, well, I'll go for the biggest engine, surely that will be the best. And although under some circumstances that is true, I would strongly recommend trying out some of the others, and this one being the literal opposite end of the spectrum for their superbikes, it actually makes it pretty unique in that way. But overall, that's it for this pick. Of course, I'll see you guys next time, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.